Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our Zoom Daily with Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz to our realistic map of meaning. We're slowly winding down on the laws of charity. I don't know if we'll finish them tonight or not, but we'll let the rabbi lead and see where we're going to go from there. But it's been great material of late, so feel free to like the video and share it on social media. Let's just jump right in and say hello. Shalom, Rabbi Schwartz. So good to be with you again, and we're going to turn the class right over to you.
Hello, Dan and Ronald, and thank you, and good to be back. And let's see if we finish tonight. Slowly winding down, slowly being the operative word. There's a lot of interesting thoughts, so I'm going to share the screen here. Should have paragraph 16 on your screen now. Okay, so we had read this, and we're now going to do the Talmudic source for it, so that'll remind us what it's about. And it's in Ketubot, which deals with marriage contracts. And it says over there, happy are they that keep justice, that do righteousness at all times. That is a verse. Is it possible to do righteousness at all times? This explained our rabbis of Yabna, or as others say, Rabbi Eliezer, refers to a man who maintains his sons and daughters while they are young. Rabbi Samuel ben Nachman said, this refers to a man who brings up an orphan boy or orphan girl in his house and enables them to marry. So first of all, what does that got to do with us? This verse, righteousness, I'll remind you again, the word for righteousness in Hebrew is staka, or tzedek, which is the root of charity. So it's a double entendre. And excuse me. So they do justice. They're stuck at all times. How can you do stuck at all times? Because you've got you're raising the people. They're not your own responsibility, but you brought them into your house. You're looking after them. So every minute you're doing stuck. So one guy says it's your own sons and daughters because while they are young, because you tend to you start with an obligation. They're your children, you have to look after them, but then you keep them going past when they could be on their own. And Rabbi Samuel ben Nachman says no, it refers to no, your own kids. We're gonna call your responsibility, but if you have an orphan boy or orphan girl in your house and enable them to marry, so that's how you do it. So that is the Talmud, and as a little different what Rambam said. And now I'm going to go to the Shulchan Aruch, and he says like this: one who provides sustenance to his older children, for whom he is no longer obligated in order to teach the males Torah and to direct the females in the proper way, and also one who provides gifts to his father and they rely on them. All this is within the bounds of charity. Moreover, he must give precedence over others, even when it is not his father or son, but it is his relative. He must give him precedence over all others. A paternal brother is before a maternal one, and the poor of his household are before the poor of his city, and they are before the poor of another city. To which the Ramah adds, those that are resident in the city are called the poor of the city, and they are prior to other poor people who come there from other places. And then back to the Shulchan Aruch, those that live in the land of Israel are prior to those that live outside the land. So they're discussing priorities because you can have more. We started with if you have something in front of you, you have a budget, so you give them all the way up there. But now let's talk practically speaking. There's always so many people that need. So here's how you prioritize who to give to. Ramah adds again, one's own sustenance takes precedence over that of all others. So he's not obligated to give charity until he has arranged for himself. After this, he should first provide sustenance for his father and mother, if they are poor, before the needs of his children. They, the children, are before all other relatives, who are before his neighbors, who come before the people of a city, who come before those of another city. The same priorities apply in the case of captives, whom he must redeem. Okay. So on this, summer cold here. Kesef Mishnah. Kesef Mishnah is the premier commentary, or the first premier commentary on the Rambam, and in the standard editions, he is one of the major commentaries on the side. It's very common for the classics to be printed with their commentaries on the side. So the Rambam is in the middle, and then there's a commentary around the side, and the primary one is the Kesef Mishnah. It happens to be the name of the Kesef Mishnah. His name is Rabbi Yosef Kairon. He happens to be the author of the Shulchan Aruch that we've been studying alongside, and his I guess his whole life was devoted to exploring the halacha that the Rambam I itemized. In this case, he's commenting right on what the Rambam says. Then there was another fellow who wrote the first version of the Shulchan Aruch, and he wrote a commentary on that guy. And then he finally wrote his own Shulchan Aruch, and so he's gone over the material 3 times. So, anyways, he explains that children past the age of 6 are considered older children, for whom has expired the father's parental responsibility of support. So, in his day, the age of 6, and don't be so shocked, because if you look at what you call them, Aboriginal societies or indigenous societies or primitive societies, they do send the kids out to work at 6 or 8 years old. They're now capable of doing something that's useful, and and maintaining, earning a wage, let's say, that keeps them alive. Yeah, so that's considered okay. So then that's up there. Of course, you want to give them a hand up to go way beyond that, but yeah, right. So that's the point. So he's saying that biologically, you could you do have to look after your own kids, but it's only till they're able to fend for themselves. That's 6, and then after that, that would be considered charity. As for one's parents, I continue, it has already been established elsewhere that the duty to honor one's parents does not include spending one's own funds for their support. You have to do, for instance, honoring is to help them shop, but it doesn't mean you pay for the goods. It means you go with them and you help them carry the goods and stay with them. So, like, you're an honor guard, you're accompanying them. Therefore, M points out that since there is no pre-existing obligation to provide support for older children or parents, doing so qualifies as an act of charity. So whenever you do that, you are performing an act of charity. Okay, so that's what's going behind the scenes. My note B, it has already been stated in Chapter 7, Paragraph 13, that charitable support for one's own relatives takes precedence over others. We did this. Why is it repeated here with regard to one's children and parents? Why would it not have been enough to simply inform us that there is no other obligation to provide support for other older children or parents? Is the question I asked. So Rambam explains that the older children are supported so that they may be fully educated in the Torah and trained in proper conduct. This suggests that in the absence of this goal, if that's not why you were giving them support, the support would not be viewed as a charitable act. Why? Proper conduct has never been mentioned as a prerequisite to receiving charity. And that a little bit. So I continue in Chapter 7, Paragraph 9. Rambam ruled that we need not concern ourselves with a person of wealth who, because of stinginess, refuses to utilize that wealth in self-support. Do you remember that? We discussed the case where a guy says, "Oh, you got a duty to give charity. You look after me."
Oh, I saw that in the Midwest a lot, Rabbi. I mean, farmers that have multi-million-dollar assets and they walk around dirtier than the street people.
Okay. So that's an interesting case, because they may have. I mean, you can't really take the farm to the store. you have all this, so you don't want to start selling it. So that's an interesting, right? Yeah. So some of them could be, I have land, but nobody wants to buy it, or I don't want to sell it. But okay. But then there are those that they don't care. Um, so, anyways, I continue. Would not the same be true of someone who possesses the ability and opportunity to be self-supporting, but squanders himself in idle pursuit? That's not supposed, right? Um, in this vein, it might be argued that older children who have grown beyond the obligation of their parents to support them should not be able to look for further support since, by definition, they have reached the age of self-support.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question from YouTube?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Amy's asking a question about what if your father passes away and leaves your mother a widow?
Right.
Is there a requirement to support? Just curious.
Yeah, he's going to get to that. Yes, of course. We're talking about where uh, a widow, especially a widow, but your mother, once your parents have no money, so then supporting them, then they're obviously incapable of looking after themselves. They're older, then nobody wants to hire them, and so on. Uh, and they take priority of it because they're close, they're close relatives. So that's what we were saying earlier. They even before your kids, which is a question: which kids do you mean? You mean the very young that are that can't look after themselves, or do you mean the ones that you're looking after because you want to keep them in school and so on? But certainly parents are a priority when they don't have their own funds, and they need support. So then they're your highest priority, second highest. Um, Actually, no, you yourself are your own priority. So you said that you have to look out. You have to make sure you can't squander all your money on other people. You first have to live at least to a certain standard. So okay, so to this, Rambam answers that they may indeed be capable of self-support, but will entail a terrible deprivation in terms of lost opportunity for personal growth. I'm talking about the kids now. So they could look after themselves, but it would cost them a lot. All the more so when the need for such personal growth is not yet appreciated. So thus, and Rambam adds a new category to the concept of de machsoro, which was the phrase he used at the very beginning, which is the phrase in the verse, which means fulfilling the lack, enough to fill the lack. That was the term that Torah used as to what you're doing when you're giving charity. You're filling the lack, which was introduced in the beginning of chapter 7. A lack may exist not only in terms of a previous lifestyle that has disappeared, not only a minimum standard that had never been attained, but even with regard to a potential that remains to be defined or even pursued. I guess a little flowery there. I'm talking about here where you're supporting your kids so that they can, become educated or, um, uh, developed, right? So, under what grounds do you call that charity? So they never had a previous lifestyle. They've always been living, with you. They can't see that. Um, they don't have there's no minimum standard that had never been attained, uh, which we discussed where, they're getting married, somebody's getting married and they don't have enough to set up a house. It was a part of charity to give them what they needed to set up the house. So there's a minimum standard of living. You're giving them more than that, but even with regard to a potential that remains to be defined, you don't know what they're going to be earning, but you want them to be earning really nice, and so until they get there, you're going to support them. So you might think that's not charity. It's So he's saying no, because as long as um, the end goal or they're involved in doing something worthwhile, and you're supporting them to get there, so that's you can consider that charity. This category of de machsoro can only be fully understood in the context of the charitable act that strives as far as possible to strengthen the dignity of the recipient. For this reason, Should be a comma there. It is presented here directly following the enumeration of the 8 levels of charity that descend, as explained above, according to the element of dignity inherent in each mode of giving. So that I'm getting, I'm guessing here sometimes because nobody discusses this. I wrote these notes on my own, and it sort of explains the flow of the Rambam. He just finished the 8 levels, and now he's coming back to this because he's established the strengthening the dignity of the recipient, not only the quantity but the quality. Parents too may experience a need which they don't express, either out of pride or ignorance. It is especially incumbent upon their better endowed children to be alert for such possibilities and to correct them. What's this for? 2 such possibilities, okay. To do so is not an act of self-indulgence or guilt removal, but a true act of charity, whereby the dignity of one's parents is maintained commensurate with the status of their family and themselves. So the parents fall into a situation. This is what she was asking me. Your mother is a widow, so and they have pride, or they don't realize that they're entitled to a certain level. So it's incumbent on their children to be alert to what's happening here, and it's not an act of self-indulgence or just trying to not feel guilty, but it's a true act of charity where you're restoring the dignity. Finally, Rambam concludes the paragraph by declaring that anyone who invites the poor or orphan to join his table enjoys a special merit to have his prayers answered. They want me to take out the enjoy special merit to have his prayers answered. The emphasis here is again on imparting dignity together with financial support. This special merit is not declared for a normal charity donor. Only one who attends to the complete needs of the poor, the emotional as well as the physical needs, as readily as he does for his own family, is deserving of being attended to as a member of the family table of God, as it were. So that's what he was saying, that if you took the orphans in and made them part of your family, there's just no higher. You restored, made them normal. Note C, is it a charitable act to donate money to a yeshiva, or is it another kind of communal obligation? A yeshiva is a school that teaches Torah, and teach people how to bathe. In the laws of learning Torah, there's a section on how to learn Torah, what the parameters there are. Rambam explains that ultimately is incumbent upon every Jew to ensure that every Jewish child is instructed in the Torah. It's a national obligation. A donation to a yeshiva would at least be an indirect participation in this obligation. However, when the child reaches bar mitzvah, the age of majority, he assumes this responsibility himself. So this would not seem to be true of a donation to a yeshiva for boys beyond this age. Would such a donation qualify towards the percentage of income that the donor wanted to commit to charity? Remember, let's say he wants to give the 10% or even 20% or whatever he assumes. So when he's donating to yeshiva, which is, it's the other mitzvah of teaching people Torah, so can you call it as charity too, is I guess what I'm asking. From Rambam, it would seem that the donation does count as charity. Rambam only chose the case of one's own children to emphasize that even with them, for whom we might think that we are responsible for other reasons, it is charity of the highest order when the support is given to enable them to pursue their Torah studies. There should be one there. Okay. And let's on with this. Okay. So we go to paragraph 17. The sages have commanded that instead of servants, one should employ the poor and orphans to serve his table. It is better to use these and profit the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from his property, and not profit those from the seed of Ham So he's talking about those days when they had Negro slaves. Ham was considered the ancestor of the Negroes, and I think that's what he was referring to. So when that was the case, so he's saying, don't use slaves, use hire people. I mean, you wouldn't have to pay for the slaves, but he said, use your own community. For all those who multiplied, I'm sure it was more expensive to hire your own community. For all those who multiply their servants, increase sin, iniquity in the world. But if the poor and the orphan are the dwellers of his house, then every hour he increases merit and the performance of the commandments. He gets this from chapter 1 in Pirkei Avos, you were mentioning before, the fifth Mishnah. Yossi ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem, used to say, let thy house be wide open, and let the poor be members of your household. So that was his advice, and he didn't talk about charity there. He just thought this was an advice, but the Rambam was using that advice. And then in the next chapter, the Mishnah 7, he, which is Hillel, used to say, the more flesh, the more worms. The fatter you get, the more worms you're going to create. You don't do yourself any good. The more property, the more anxiety. The more wives, the more witchcraft. Talking about a time when you can polygamy. The more bondwomen, the more lewdness. The more slaves, the more robbery. But the more righteousness, tzedakah, the more peace. It brings peace into the house, into the world, into the community. And Shulchan Aruch condenses all this into make the poor members of your household. Our notes on this are the Rambam's emphasis on the increase of sin or merit in the world evokes his comments in chapter 3, paragraph 2 of the Laws of Repentance, which was very early on in his book, wherein he explains that there is a scale for each man, for each state, and for the world at large, on which is balanced all the respective sins and merits. Should any scale be tipped in favor of the sins, then destruction would immediately follow. Thus, Rambam seems to be exhorting us to be sure to stave off destruction by tipping the scales favorably with acts of merit. Maybe I should have enlarged on this a little bit. Let's say, in other words, he's saying you have scales and you're constantly being judged, and your merits and the merits are being put on the scale. And if ever your demerits outweigh your merits, you're going to immediately be punished or done away with even. So that's you. So if you continue to live, okay, so you're more good than bad, at least, because you're still alive. But what about your city? You may be the righteous man in your city, and the city is really got more bad things going on than good things. The city deserves to be destroyed. There's a scale for the city. But you know what? You did one extra act, so altogether, you outweighed the demerits of everybody else by your one extra act. So really, he's trying to inspire us to consider ourselves responsible for everybody. That's basically what he's saying. And
May I ask a question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Does that include the nations, that statement, or is that just for Israel?
No, he's talking about the world at large.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, for the world at large. No. Chapter 3, yeah.
Benoni,
like a in-between guy. Yeah. It's a little, I think, right. So you could challenge this by saying that, well, if you're, well, you might say, well, look, if the city's demerits are so bad that it needs me to outweigh everybody else, then there's a whole bunch of people in there that individually have more demerits than merits. How come they're still alive? How come they haven't been judged individually already? Because the logic would suggest, I'd have to have a whole bunch to weigh to tip the scales. and get everybody surviving. So the math is hard to work out there. But the way to explain that is to say that, well, God's patient. So they could be slated for destruction or all kinds of actions, but you save the day. But it gets more sophisticated. When you really start analyzing it, it can be very, very sophisticated because God doesn't want to kill anybody. He's given everybody life in order to get something done. And what I explain in my book, that we're all here to create like God creates, and He's always managing the program so that we have opportunities to create. And, we often do not create or we destroy, but so He's changing and managing the circumstances and the opportunities and the incentives so that we won't wind up doing creating a world rather than destroying the world. He's always managing that. And so, but what he's talking about is that you might, your example may be just the thing that everybody else needed when you do an extra good act. As well, if he's doing that, so then I better, shape up my my act and that kind of thing. So there's always patience involved, and everything's being weighed against everything else. And he's just trying to impress upon you how important it can be that you do the right thing at the right time. Any little thing, it always counts. I think that's where you have to analyze it. Paragraph 18. Always a man should press himself and endure pain in order not to require the assistance of others, nor throw himself onto the community. What's wrong with nor? Or, you say or, okay. Press himself and endure pain. Try not to require charity. And so the sages have commanded and said, better to make your Sabbath as the weekday rather than to require assistance from others, or accept assistance, maybe it should be. So even though it's a rabbinic injunction to spend a lot on Shabbos, to make sure that you have extra big meals and comfort on Shabbos, but if that's going to require you to borrow or take money from charity, better not, is what they're saying. Even if he is a sage and highly honored, and then becomes impoverished, he should work at some task, even a contemptible one, and not seek assistance from others. Better to flay the skins of dead animals than to say to the people, I am a great sage, or I'm a priest, and therefore provide for me. In this, the sages have commanded. Among the great sages, there were woodcutters and beam haulers and water carriers to the gardens. These are the most menial of tasks, and those who worked with iron and coals, and asked not from the community, nor accepted from them when it was proffered to them. Okay, well, we're not going to finish today, I see. Just changing this. We will finish next time on Monday, or Sunday, I guess. Is it? Yeah. This is his second last chapter. So I'm going to leave it at here and put in our marker, and we'll have a little review and then the last paragraph next time, and see how he finishes it with a flourish. Any questions? Any other questions? That was a good question.
No, that really helps clarify. I was kind of shocked with the 6-year-old age for children, but I appreciate you expounding on that a little bit. I mean, let's face it. I mean, kids can go out there and mix it up, and and I mean, I think I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I was bringing home funds myself. Started doing paper routes and stuff like that, and contributing, and
we have to appreciate how far we've come. I mean, I want to realize that we've built a society that functions according to this rule, according to these ideas. You have to look at the kids.
But like I made that comment, it wasn't publicly, but we see more and more and more in this day and age, 40-year-old kids still with their hand out, hanging at home or living in their parents' basement, and that's shameful. I like the way you closed out in the last few chapters or paragraphs about people should strive not to be in that needy situation. I mean, dignity is something you've got to stand up for, and
Right, right.
yeah,
So he saw you coming. I mean, see all these questions. So Amy had a very good question. He was just about to actually answer it. But keep the questions coming, and sometimes you'll uncover something new, and it'll be amazing.
yeah.
Um,
As far as the 6-year-olds, Amy says that was shocking, but life was different back then for sure.
right.
Ages were different too. People might have only lived to 30.
Say
And I
again?
think in the early 20th century, the age of marriage was still very young compared to what it is today. Uh,
I mentioned. I know
and
that.
and possibly even later, because Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin, because the laws were still not up to date with the development of humans in that respect, with how changes from older times. So the laws were still pretty on a lower level, not expecting people to live into their 80s. So therefore, your life would have been, you were more mature at younger
Yeah,
ages
yeah.
back then.
20% of your life is over by the age of 6. Yeah.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
So we can take pride in how we've developed, and taking care of these things as a general society, and then also at
Yeah.
the same time recognize that the Torah foresaw this opportunity, this ability, and was praying for it all along, and has more to offer us even today. So
Yeah, I like that one. Was it one Pirkei Avot that mentioned about keeping your door open to the poor, and the reason behind all that? I mean, yeah, it's beautiful as far as an ideal, but I mean, I have such difficulty with people that demand and expect, and I'm all for being a giver, but it's got to be an act of charity, not a mugging.
right, right. Well, you know, there's two.
Rabbi Guri's got a comment. He says regarding Dimak Sorrow
Yeah.
and the typical beggar on the street, would his lack be limited to what he is asking via his sign, for example, or how would you gauge his lack?
So it used to be that the people that go around collecting do not badly. I told you early on, and that maybe I'll repeat the story, that when I was a student many years ago in Israel, and where I studied, in the hall was less frequented, so in that particular room, and so when it rained, so some of the beggars that were out in the streets would come in to get out of the rain, because nobody was on the street. They couldn't beg, couldn't beg on the street, so they just came in. So this guy came in there, and he starts counting his money. And there's a few of us learning at different tables, and slowly but surely, our heads go up. He's got quite a bit to count there. We know him; he's a beggar on the streets, and we're wondering, well, how much do you take in there? So it was quite a bit. He was doing not too badly. So you can earn a living. So people like that, you only give, early on in chapter 7, and he said you give them something small, because since they're asking, so this idea of dignity, you don't treat them like dirt, or not present, even though they don't really need your assistance. So you give them something small, and that's how they make a living. Everybody gets something small, and it adds up. Today, you might the homeless and drug addicts and so on. The people are destitute, that they're not able to look after themselves. So this is a whole different situation. So we also discussed in earlier chapters about a poverty line. So there is a poverty line that that you have to provide minimum shelter, food, and so on. And today we do, with social assistance. The government will give you enough to live, not high on the hog, but and maybe not even alone. Maybe you have to double up with somebody in an apartment, but you can keep your soul and body together, basically on social assistance. However, if you're a drug addict or if you're crazy, like some of these people are not capable, they're just not capable of looking after them. Yeah, so then that's a different story. That's they're not able. They don't can, and they're just unable. So they're
So is there a stage where being compassion or overly compassionate is there a stage where overly compassionate is an error?
if no, only if you're it's a judgment call. Are you robbing them the opportunity to grow out of this? That's basically what you're looking for. Can you grow out of this or not? And so there's so many needs. You know, like again, you come first. You have to set up yourself, your kids and your parents, and so there's a whole hierarchy of who you have to look after. But when there's we still have this issue, even though we have social assistance and people don't have to starve. Listen, 100 years ago, people would starve to death. Not in Canada or the States. I don't think anybody's starving to death unless they are mentally ill and don't know how to do. And then, you don't have the skills to look after that. So that society is trying to do what it can for that. It's always a problem. So
Wow.
yeah, it's
Wow. So it sounds like we'll be winding up with the laws of charity this Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll be finishing then, Rabbi?
yes. I probably am. I have and then maybe I'll introduce what I propose to do next.
Well, there you go. So make sure you share this and like it on social media, and join us back here again Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And we'll close out then with the laws of charity, and we will be going. Rabbi will let us in on what he plans to share next. So I look forward to hearing what that's going to be. Ronald, have you got any final comments for the Rabbi before we wind it down?
No, it was just the one on the age factor that I understood the age factor, although it's very low. I could understand times were different, lifespans were different. So that was the only thing.
Have you ever heard of the blood diamonds?
Yes.
What? Yes. Why are they called blood diamonds?
Because the slaves and slaves
the
driven
children
to get these diamonds. Yeah.
the children were working the mines.
And then now they're working the lithium mines for our cell phone batteries and electric cars.
Right. So it's still there's still societies in our day that still have this. Yeah.
There's so much to think about when it comes to charity or deliverance in general, just to help make the world a better place. And I think this helps give us more perspective or broaden our view quite a lot. And so it's been great, Rabbi, so far. I look forward to the closeout on Sunday and hearing what you're thinking of doing next.